Have you ever had one of those moments that split your life into before and after, like an invisible line between what used to be normal and something completely different? One day you're living a regular life with friends, school, and everyday worries. And then suddenly, something happens that turns everything into a nightmare. I went through something like that, and it changed my life forever. Now, looking back, I realize that so many mistakes come from a single fleeting moment of weakness, a sudden, foolish idea that sparks in someone's mind and spirals into a nightmare, tearing someone's life apart. Imagine sitting with friends, having a drink, and someone casually suggests going for a drive, only to end up in a terrible accident. Or maybe you've heard about that guy who swallowed a slug on a dare at a party, only to end up paralyzed because the slug carried a parasite that invaded his brain. So many of these disasters are of our own making. And what happened to me wasn't far from these kinds of stories. At the time, I was in college, living in a dorm with friends. Like most college students, we'd hang out after class, drinking, talking, and unwinding. Naturally, there were always girls around, and every guy tried to stand out in some way, sometimes coming up with the wildest ideas. One Friday around 1 a.m., my friend Jake, who I'd known since high school, asked, "Do you guys want to do something creepy?" We all exchanged glances, expecting some stupid joke, but Jake was serious. He explained that he'd recently visited his grandfather and found something interesting while cleaning the attic. He pulled out an old piece of parchment and spread it out on the table. On it was a circle, almost like a diagram filled with symbols that looked demonic. Or at least that's how they seemed to me. The symbols had a dark vibe, and in the corner was a spell in English, which, according to Jake, would summon a spirit if recited aloud. When we read it, some of us glanced around nervously while others smirked, feeling a mix of thrill and fear. "So, what do you think?" Jake asked. Michael was the first to respond, saying, "Hell yeah, I'm in." His excitement triggered everyone else, and soon everyone was nodding, agreeing to this crazy idea. Honestly, I didn't want to be part of it, but I didn't want to be the odd one out, so I nodded too. We held hands, placed a candle in the center of the diagram, and lit it. Jake started reading the incantation, and we repeated after him. The room was silent except for the faint hum of passing cars outside and Jake's low voice. The atmosphere grew increasingly eerie. I glanced around at my friends. The girls looked uneasy, fidgeting in their seats, their faces pale. The guys tried to keep cool, but I could feel the tension mounting with each word of the spell. Jake seemed to be driven by something, his pace quickening as he chanted. I looked at him and noticed he looked scared too, like he was being compelled by some force. What the hell is going on? I thought. Then I felt a chill, as if a draft had swept through the room. I looked at the door, but it was shut tight, as was the window. Where's that cold coming from? I wondered. The candle flame flickered, and I felt a strange vibration. The dresser behind me started to shake. What the hell is happening? I was scared, and from the looks on my friends' faces, they felt it too. But we stayed there. I tried to let go of the hand I was holding, but I couldn't, as if some force was binding us together. Meanwhile, Jake's voice grew louder and more intense, and the speed of his chanting increased. The candle flame flickered violently, and then we noticed something eerie. The diagram on the parchment seemed to glow faintly. It wasn't a bright light, just barely visible, like it was hovering on the edge of reality and imagination. A small whirlwind started forming around the candle, tiny particles swirling around it, and soon I could hear a strange sound. As I listened, I realized it was a soft, multi-voiced wailing, as though dozens, maybe even hundreds of souls were crying out, trying to escape from some far-off hell. We watched, both fascinated and terrified, as the little whirlwind grew stronger. Suddenly, a particle broke away from the main swirl and drifted toward me. I thought I saw a twisted, anguished face within it, and it kept coming closer. I tried to pull away, wanted to break free from the circle, but I was paralyzed, stuck as this particle hit me square in the forehead. In an instant, searing pain shot through my head. I screamed, jerking violently, and tore myself away from the circle. In that moment, it felt like a hurricane ripped through the room. Everything flew in different directions, and we were thrown back. I kept screaming, my head splitting with pain. I didn't understand what had just happened. I only knew I had to get out. Without thinking, I dashed for the door, flung it open, and ran outside. I ran and ran, clutching my head, screaming from the unbearable pain. I was so disoriented I didn't even know where I was until I realized I'd made it to the street. Then I saw headlights speeding toward me. And then everything went dark, and at last the pain faded away. I woke up to find myself in a hospital bed, surrounded by all kinds of monitors, IV drips, and medical equipment. Turning my head with some effort, I saw my parents beside me. The worry on their faces was so intense it made my heart sink. My mother's eyes were red and swollen from crying, and my father, who looked tense and grim, broke into a smile when he realized I was awake and quickly went to get the doctor. Later I learned that I'd run into the road and been hit by a truck. Miraculously, I survived with no severe injuries, which the doctors called a true miracle. As I gradually started to recover, my friends came to visit. Jake looked devastated, constantly apologizing, blaming himself for that foolish spell idea. I could see how much it weighed on him, so I tried to reassure him, saying no one forced me to join in. We talked about that fateful night, and I asked if they'd seen the strange things I'd seen when everything in the room started to go wrong. But they just shook their heads, insisting they hadn't seen anything. That surprised me. I clearly remembered the swirling vortex around the candle, but they said they only felt a cold draft and the shock when I broke the circle. It left me unsettled. Had I imagined it? Or was it a hallucination? What had really happened? I decided not to torture myself with questions and tried to put it all behind me like a bad dream. Slowly, I regained my strength, and before long, I was scheduled for discharge. By the last day, I was able to get out of bed and walk around the hospital. I'd go outside sometimes to breathe fresh air or sit on a bench, warming up in the sun. One day, after a short walk, something terrifying happened. I was heading back to my room when I passed a man walking slowly with a limp, leaning on a cane. At first, he looked like an ordinary patient in a hospital gown. But then I noticed something unsettling perched on his shoulders and head. Some bizarre creature. I blinked, trying to convince myself I was just seeing things, but something deep inside made me look again. What I saw was the most horrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. It looked like a writhing mass of slime, covered in tentacles and eyes pointing in every direction, pressing down on the man with its weight. Yet he seemed entirely unaware of it. Even more disturbing, no one else seemed to notice it either. I stood there, frozen, every muscle tense, unable to tear my gaze away as I began to shake. The fear was paralyzing, and I felt myself losing control. Desperately, I grabbed a passing nurse, pointed to the man, and asked if she could see anything unusual. She glanced at him, nodded, and said he was just heading to a procedure. Then she asked if I was all right. Trying to keep it together, I asked her directly, "Do you see anything on his neck?" The nurse looked at the man again, visibly puzzled, then shook her head, assuring me everything was fine. She walked away, leaving me in complete confusion. Was I losing my mind? This thought chilled me to the core. And then I noticed one of the creature's eyes had turned toward me, then another and another. Soon, all the eyes of that monstrous thing were fixed on me. Overwhelmed with terror, I ran back to my room, dove under the covers, trying to shut everything out. My mind raced with questions. What was happening to me? What had I seen? Was it a hallucination or some after effect of the accident, should I tell anyone? Or would they think I was insane? A crushing sense of loneliness and panic took hold of me. I lay there huddled under the blanket, feeling like my insides were turning to ice. The image of that creature wouldn't leave my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was still nearby, watching me. Damn, maybe I was really losing it. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that it was just a hallucination, a result of the trauma. After all, getting hit by a truck could mess with anyone's mind. As long as I could recognize it as a hallucination, I reasoned, I wasn't going crazy. With these thoughts, I was finally discharged from the hospital and went home. My recovery continued there for another week, and once I felt strong enough, I decided to go back to college. I didn't want to fall behind. My parents dropped me off and my friends greeted me warmly. Life seemed to be returning to normal. I dove back into my studies, and for a while everything was fine. Until it wasn't. About a month later, my friends and I were leaving an economics lecture and heading down the stairs when I stopped dead in my tracks. On the landing ahead, I saw something enormous, something none of my friends seemed to notice. It was a giant spider, about the size of an armchair, sitting motionless on the wall, its 8 gleaming eyes scanning the area. A wave of terror washed over me. I couldn't look away. Every detail was horrifyingly vivid, the tiny hairs on its legs, the gleam of its massive jaws dripping with saliva. It was too real to be a figment of my imagination. My mind couldn't possibly invent such nightmarish precision. Pointing at the creature, I asked Michael if he saw anything. He looked at me with confusion, having no idea what I was talking about. How could he not see it? It was right there, clear as day, as if I could reach out and touch it. Jake came over worried and asked, "Hey man, what's wrong?" I managed to say that I saw something on the wall. His face tensed up, and he stepped closer to the spider while I stood there, fists clenched in fear. He asked, "Where is it?" I said. "Look up, right above you." Jake raised his hand and moved it over the spot where the creature was, but his hand passed through it like it was just a shadow or a projection. My head spun. What did this mean? A ghost, a vision, but it looked so real. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, but I decided to avoid the creature and continued down the stairs, careful not to draw its attention. Outside, Michael and Jake stopped and pulled me aside, pressing me for an explanation. I hesitated, afraid they'd think I was crazy, but finally I caved and told them everything. They listened, but their faces told me they didn't believe me. Michael suggested it was just after effects of the accident and that I needed rest, but I couldn't agree with him. These creatures hadn't harmed me yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time. Still, I resolved to keep quiet about what I was seeing. If I told anyone else, they'd surely think I was losing my mind. Time flew by, and I tried to carry on with my life, pretending not to notice the strange creatures that had started appearing around me, but every day it became harder. These things were showing up more frequently, as if they'd become part of my new world, a reality I'd have to accept. Some creatures simply watched people perching in trees or even strolling casually among pedestrians. Once I saw a strange figure that looked like a woman, except her head was that of a chicken. She held a large rat in her hands as she walked. her heels tapping rhythmically on the pavement. No one around paid her any mind, as if she didn't exist. I stood there, watching her walk by, before forcing myself to keep moving, understanding that this was just another part of the reality I'd have to live with. I didn't want to see a doctor. I knew they'd probably just load me up with medication. I'd read online about similar symptoms and realized that wouldn't solve the problem, just suppress it with chemicals. So I kept encountering these creatures on my own. The ones that scared me the most were those that latched onto people like leeches. I saw one at the hospital, clinging to a man's neck, weighing him down. The man walked, hunched over under this invisible burden, but I could see what made him bend under the weight. I noticed others like it too, attached to people's limbs, chests, heads, almost like they were feeding off them. At first their hosts looked normal, but there were those who seemed visibly drained, as though their life was being sapped away. I began to wonder if these creatures were the reason for their exhausted, sickly appearance. Most likely they were. Could I do anything? Warn them? Hardly. If I started talking about what I was seeing, people would think I was crazy. So I tried to ignore it all and live as normally as I could. Though deep down, I knew that was just a facade. In the meantime, I searched online, trying to find anything remotely similar to what I was experiencing, but I found nothing. Strange creatures only I could see. It seemed like I was the only one who noticed them. The question gnawed at me. Why me? A month passed, and I slowly adapted to my new reality. The semester was nearing its end, and exams loomed ahead. I spent more time in the library preparing, often staying late. One evening I looked at the clock and realized it was already 8 p.m. Time to head home. I packed up my books and notebooks, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and left the university, following my usual route. The path wound through a neighborhood with small, cozy houses and quiet streets, which I loved. At night, this part of town felt peaceful, as if the city itself had fallen into a gentle, hushed slumber. Trees, softly illuminated by streetlights, swayed in the breeze, and the rustling leaves added a layer of tranquility. But suddenly, a strange sense of unease washed over me, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from. My heart skipped a beat and I stopped, scanning the darkness with heightened senses. At that moment, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, stepped out from around the corner of a nearby alley. She was dressed in a black dress, her whole appearance somber and heavy. Her gaze held a sadness, an emptiness and despair that seemed unnatural for a child. But what truly terrified me were the huge, shapeless shadows surrounding her. These shadows circled around her like ominous ghosts, with a thin, thread-like connection stretching between them and the girl, as if they were draining her energy, her life force. The shadows had massive eyes that reminded me of animals, perhaps cats, but their expressions were cold and unnerving. They twisted and coiled around her like smoke, their large, watchful eyes scanning the surroundings. It was a terrifying sight that sent chills down my spine. I felt an overwhelming sense of pity for the girl. Her face, lifeless and full of despair, seemed to cry out for help, though she made no sound. She kept walking down the alley, step by step, with the shadows trailing behind her like a dark cloak, leaving an eerie trail in the air. I followed her at a distance, careful not to frighten her. She turned into a neighborhood of high-rise buildings, and I, wanting to understand what was happening, kept my eyes on her and those shadows. She went into a narrow alley between the buildings, a place that was usually deserted. A thought flashed through my mind. What was she looking for in that darkness? Staying as inconspicuous as possible, I stepped into the shadows after her, not knowing what I'd find next. As I stepped into the alley, I felt the atmosphere shift around me. It was darker here than outside, where the streetlights had at least held the shadows at bay. The silence pressed down, heavy and unsettling, and there was something ominous in the air. Ahead, I saw the girl walking slowly, but she suddenly stopped. The creatures surrounding her closed in, pressing closer, tightening their circle. Then, without warning, she dropped to her knees, as if her strength had been drained. The shadows swarmed her like predators surrounding their prey. My heart pounded, and a terrifying thought flashed through my mind. They were going to devour her, take her life. I felt a surge of fear and hesitation. Maybe she was really in danger and needed help, but what could I do against these terrifying creatures? Swallowing hard, I felt my heart race even faster, but there was no turning back. I forced myself to push forward, gathering whatever courage I had left, and ran toward the girl. I charged ahead, trying not to think about what these creatures might do to me. I hoped I could pass through them like ghosts, but as I got closer, the tension in the air became almost palpable. When I was nearly there, one of the creatures extended a shadowy, smoky limb toward me, and in an instant, I felt myself thrown back by an invisible force. These things were real to me. They weren't just visions. What the hell? I thought. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. The creatures seemed to sense my presence, and one of them, a nightmare made flesh, began advancing toward me, closing the gap with every second. I froze in fear, unsure what to do, as the other shadows shifted their focus to me, leaving the girl lying unconscious, her life nearly drained. I realized that if I didn't help her now, she might not survive. Gathering my resolve, I dodged and weaved past the creatures as they tried to grab me. Somehow, I managed to avoid their grasp, as if something unseen was guiding me through this nightmare. When I reached the girl, I quickly lifted her into my arms. She was as light as a doll, and holding her close, I sprinted out of the alley, forcing myself not to look back. The shadows whipped around, trying to block my path, but by some miracle I slipped past them. I ran, clutching the girl tightly, feeling a mixture of adrenaline and fear surge through me. I didn't know if I could escape or what lay ahead, but I was sure of one thing: I couldn't leave her in that horrible place. I dashed through the narrow streets where the streetlights barely illuminated the path. The creatures, enraged, chased after us, their sinister eyes glowing brighter, filled with malice. I held on to the girl, trying not to stumble, feeling a growing sense of despair in my chest. Then I noticed a thin thread still connecting her to the shadows, like a chain that wouldn't let them retreat. They weren't going to give up. My mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. I thought of breaking that connection. Without hesitation, I grabbed at the thread, and an intense burning pain shot through my hand. I cursed, but I didn't give up. I kept running, trying to figure out my next move, when I realized I'd reached a dead end. Before I could stop, something struck me from behind, sending me sprawling against the wall, still holding on to the girl. Struggling to catch my breath, I looked around. The creatures were closing in, sensing that I had nowhere left to run. Gently, I propped the girl against the wall, frantically searching for anything I could use as a weapon. In the corner, I spotted an old wooden frame, grabbed it, and began swinging it at the shadows. One after another, the creatures lunged at me, and I fought back with everything I had. One of them hit me hard, slamming me against the wall, and I felt blood trickle down my face. A thought flickered through my mind. Is this the end? My vision blurred, shadows swirling before my eyes, and I was ready to give up when a fierce roar echoed from the darkness. The creatures seemed to notice something. I tried to focus and saw a silhouette moving swiftly among them. My vision cleared, and I saw a striking woman with sharp features and light hair dressed in a leather suit. In her hands, a katana gleamed as she sliced through the creatures, one by one, expertly dismantling them. The monsters shrieked but kept attacking, while the woman, like a seasoned warrior, cut them down, each one vanishing into wisps of smoke. I watched, mesmerized, as she moved with precision and grace, dispatching each creature with skill. Soon, all the shadows were gone, dissolving into the night-like mist, and the thread connecting the girl to them unraveled, vanishing completely. The girl opened her eyes, looking around in confusion, unsure of what had happened. The stranger approached her, checked her over, and then turned to me. I tried to stand as she came closer, finally able to see her face up close. She was stunning, with striking features and a piercing gaze. She looked like something out of a movie, a fierce heroine battling the forces of darkness. After a quick assessment, she extended a hand to help me up, then asked what I'd seen. Realizing she could see these creatures too, I told her everything, how I'd noticed the thread binding the girl to the monsters and how they'd attacked her. She listened intently, and when I finished, she said, "That was reckless. You could have died. But I like it." She introduced herself as Ashley. I shook her hand, introducing myself as David. But the question that had been haunting me finally burst out. What were those creatures and what was really happening? Ashley gave a vague reply, saying that it was a long story and that for now we needed to take the girl to the hospital. I nodded and approached the girl, who looked up at me with frightened eyes. I whispered softly, "Hey, you're going to be okay. I'll take you to the hospital, all right?" She didn't respond, but after a moment she nodded slightly. Gently, I lifted her into my arms, and that's when I noticed something strange. Her pupils began to change color, glowing a bright red like those of the monsters. Suddenly, she snarled and bit down on my neck. The pain was unbearable, like she was trying to tear out a piece of flesh. Desperately, I threw her off, clutching my wound, feeling the blood pouring from it. The girl stood up, her eyes full of fury. Ashley cursed under her breath, muttering something about how the girl was already lost. "How did I miss this?" she added. Drawing her katana, she pointed it at the girl, ready to strike. I shouted in horror, "Hey, are you really going to kill a little girl?" But Ashley ignored me completely. The girl, or whatever she had become, hissed, turning toward the wall and climbing up it like some sort of spider, higher and higher. "This isn't a demon, she's a human, what's happening?" Raced through my mind, but before I could react, my body weakened, and I felt myself losing consciousness. Everything went dark as I collapsed. When I came to, the first thing I felt was a burning pain in my neck, tightly bandaged with something. Looking around with difficulty, I realized I wasn't in a hospital room. Instead, I was in a strange office filled with old, heavy furniture. A massive desk with a worn wooden surface, shelves stacked with ancient books, and thick curtains covering the windows, making the room dim. Paintings depicting scenes reminiscent of ancient myths adorned the walls, giving the room an eerie, mysterious atmosphere. I tried to sit up, but as soon as I moved, a hand gently pressed down on my shoulder. A pleasant, soft-spoken woman's voice said, "You'd better not get up just yet." Soon I saw the woman, a professional-looking figure in her 40s. She looked like a classic librarian straight out of a book or movie. dressed in a formal black suit, glasses with thin frames, and dark hair pulled neatly into a bun. Her makeup was subtle, and her expression was serious yet warm and caring. I asked where I was, and she calmly replied, "Ashley brought you here. A little longer and you would have crossed to the other side. My name is Maria. Nice to meet you." I nodded but couldn't help asking why they hadn't taken me to a hospital. Maria gave a slight smile and explained, "We have our own methods of treatment, much more effective than those in hospitals. There, you might not have made it, so you should be grateful." I didn't thank her but asked another question. Who were they, and where exactly was I? "This is a ritual services agency," Maria answered. "It's where we work. Our company is small but close-knit. From what I gather, you can see demons, so if you stay, you might get some answers to your questions. But wait for the others to arrive first." 1,000 questions bubbled up inside me, but I decided to follow her advice and wait. After about 10 minutes, Ashley entered the room. She looked at me, a slight smirk on her face, and asked, "So, how are you feeling?" I nodded, feeling a bit of gratitude for her help, though everything still felt surreal. "The others will be here shortly," she said. And soon, more people began entering the room. The first was a young guy, maybe 16, with a playful, mischievous look. His chestnut hair was slightly wavy and his face lit up with a carefree smile. He glanced around the room, clearly comfortable in this setting. When he saw me, he gave an exaggerated bow, making me smile involuntarily, then sat down in a chair by the wall, crossing his arms and watching me with curiosity. Next came a man around 40. He was tall and well-built, with a muscular frame that suggested he practiced martial arts. His expression was unreadable, with a hint of sternness. He was a real powerhouse, radiating an aura of respect and a touch of fear. He glanced at me, huffed, and took a seat near the young guy, as if to signal he'd seen far more serious matters. Last was a man about 50 with light, slightly graying hair, neatly combed back. He wore glasses and dressed in a classic style, a long coat and hat that gave him the look of an intelligent, discerning man. He exuded the kind of calm wisdom that only those who know more than they reveal possess. The man took the center of the room, sitting behind the desk with his fingers interlaced. His gaze was steady and attentive. "Welcome," he began. "My name is Dr. Malcolm Lowry. You've already met Ashley and Maria. The young man here is Chad, and the gentleman is Oscar." I looked at each of them and nodded, introducing myself. "My name is David." Dr. Lowry gave a subtle smile and continued, "I imagine you have 1,000 questions. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us what happened." It wasn't easy to speak about it, but pushing through my hesitation, I began my story. I described how we decided to try a ritual as a game, how I was hit by a car that night, and how I'd started seeing strange creatures afterward. I explained how these beings looked terrifying and dangerous, how some of them attached themselves to people like parasites. Dr. Lowry listened attentively, adjusting his glasses occasionally. When I finished, he nodded slightly and said, "I see. It seems that a part of the spirit you summoned during the ritual altered your perception, allowing you to see the shadow world." "What exactly is the shadow world?" I asked, wanting to understand fully. Dr. Lowry replied calmly, as if explaining ordinary facts. "As you may have guessed, our world is surrounded by another hidden dimension, known as the shadow world. It's a realm inhabited by demons of all shapes and forms, about which we know little. Occasionally, these creatures find a way to slip into our world. They latch onto humans, feeding on their life force. For ordinary people, These demons are invisible and intangible, existing as if in another dimension. Because of this, their presence feels insubstantial and unnoticed. I remembered the thread connecting the girl to the creatures and asked quietly, "So those threads, they're real connections?" Dr. Lorry nodded. "Yes, exactly. Most people can't see them, but some like you acquire what we call true sight under certain circumstances. Each of us here has encountered something similar. It's a unique gift, though a dangerous one." I thought about this and asked, "Why could I touch them?" Dr. Lorry explained, "When you gain true sight, the distortion affects not only your perception but also your physical interactions. You can touch these beings and even fight them, but it also makes you more vulnerable. Demons can threaten you directly, and unfortunately, they can kill you." "I understand," I said, still processing everything. "And what about that girl?" "Ashley said a spirit possessed her and made her unusually strong." Dr. Lorry nodded. "That can happen. When a demon attaches itself to someone for too long, it starts not only draining life energy, but also transferring some of its own, effectively possessing the person's body." His words sent a chill through me. I was beginning to grasp just how dangerous this world was, realizing that I was now entangled in this dark reality. I asked another question. "Who are you, and what do you do?" The professor, hands folded, answered, "We are a group of like-minded people united by a single goal, to find a way to rid ourselves of this true vision." Disappointment washed over me. So returning to a normal life, one without shadows and demons, was impossible. I could understand why they wanted to stop seeing it all. The professor continued, "This is our main objective, but at the same time, we help people and make money doing it. The Ritual Services Agency is just a front. We take on jobs, sometimes even from the government." "The government knows about this?" I asked. "Of course they know, but keep it hidden." The professor nodded. "In fact, there aren't many people like us. In our city there are only about 30, which is a tiny fraction of the population." "I see," I replied. "Can you tell me more about your work?" "Our tasks vary. As you've noticed, there are demons that, like leeches, drain energy. But most of them aren't deadly. They know their boundaries. Once they've absorbed a certain amount of energy, they move on to a new victim. But some kill, hunting people. Like the one you saw with the little girl. We call it the many-faced, and have been tracking it for a long time. Sometimes people come to us troubled by strange issues, and we see that demons are the cause of their suffering. In such cases, we destroy those creatures." The professor paused, as if gauging my reaction. "But I've seen many demons. Why don't you handle them all?" I asked. "We only take on the most dangerous cases or those we're paid for. No matter how many we exterminate, we can never get rid of them all. And imagine telling someone they have a demon parasite. Most would just dismiss you. So we help those who come to us. Sure, some have common illnesses, but when nothing else works, they end up here. In short, we solve problems and earn a living doing it. Yes, it sounds mercenary, but everyone has needs, and our earnings help us cover them," the professor concluded. "I see," I said, reflecting on everything he'd shared. "Now, I'll stop with the details and get to the main question," the professor said. "What do you think about joining us?" A wave of anxiety hit me. It was a terrifying offer, to dive into a dangerous life, but at the same time, I'd be among people who understood my problem and could help. I remembered how helpless I'd felt against the demons, but here I might learn to defend myself. After a brief pause, I answered, "I need to think about it." "Of course," the professor replied calmly. "Oscar will take you home." we'll part here. 2 group members approached to help me up. I said my goodbyes and returned home, unable to stop thinking about the offer. The first thought that crossed my mind was how dangerous this venture would be. Yes, joining them meant entering a world full of demons and unimaginable creatures. But I could also find answers, understand more about my true vision, and maybe even learn to protect myself. And these people, they grew on me, especially Ashley. Confident, strong, attractive, it might even be interesting to work with her. Plus, this unusual job came with a salary which I certainly could use. Mulling it over, I decided I was in. But there was one issue. How would I balance it with college? Dropping out wasn't an option. Still, I had a gut feeling they'd find a way to help me manage. The next day, I dialed the number they'd given me. Maria answered, and I greeted her, saying I was ready to accept their offer. Her cheerful voice replied, "Great! Can you come by today? We'll go over the contract and all the details." She set a time, and after my lecture, I headed to their office at 3. When I entered, Maria, Oscar, and Chad were there, along with another woman seated in a chair. She looked about 45 and clearly unwell. Her shoulders were slumped, and her face was pale. Perched on her head was a demon, similar to the one I'd seen in the hospital, tentacles, numerous eyes, but this one was bright red, making it even more disturbing. It seemed nervous, occasionally glancing around, and a few of its eyes fixated on me as I walked by. Maria pointed to a chair beside me, and I sat down quietly, observing. The woman described severe headaches, a feeling of heaviness, and constant fatigue. She'd visited every doctor, but no one could help her, and someone had recommended she come here. Maria listened and said, "You made the right choice coming here. We can't help everyone, but we can handle your case." She handed the woman a contract and quoted a fee, $10,000. For a moment I was taken aback, but the woman seemed prepared and signed the contract without hesitation, transferring the money. Then Maria began the briefing. "Now you need to close your eyes and remain still. You may feel something strange or slight pain, but try not to move. I'll be here to help, so don't worry." The woman complied, closing her eyes, and Maria looked at Oscar. He nodded, opened a small case, and took out a syringe filled with a liquid. Oscar approached her, moving close to the monster on her head, and carefully prepared to insert the needle. The creature, sensing the threat, began thrashing, tentacles flailing, but Oscar, working with precision, quickly injected the substance. The demon let out a piercing shriek and convulsed, causing the woman to wince slightly. Maria reassured her, "Bear with it, we're almost done." Right before my eyes, the demon began to wither, dissolving into thin air until it completely vanished, leaving only a faint wisp of smoke. I stood, mouth agape, amazed at what I'd witnessed. When it was over, Maria took a cotton pad, dabbed it with a solution, and gently treated the spot on the woman's neck where the demon had been. Then she said softly, "You can open your eyes now." The woman opened her eyes cautiously, looking remarkably renewed. Her face was more vibrant, her gaze brighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted. She looked around in astonishment and exclaimed, "I feel so much better. Thank you. Thank you so much." Maria smiled and reassured her it was over, suggesting she go home and rest. The woman thanked them again, almost in disbelief at the speed of it all, and Maria walked her to the door. When the woman left, I couldn't hold back my curiosity and asked, "What did you use? What was in that syringe?" Chad smirked, took the empty syringe from Oscar, twirling it between his fingers with a casual smile, and replied, "Simple, just regular holy water." I was genuinely surprised. Maria, noticing my confusion, added, "Sometimes the most complex problems have simple solutions. Spiritual power is the primary weapon against these demons. We enhance it with religious symbols or other means. All those legends about crosses, repelling vampires, or silver bullets for werewolves have some truth to them." "I see," I nodded, remembering the katana Ashley used, and asked, "How does that work?" Maria smiled. "Ashley does use a katana, but she's learned to channel her spiritual power into the weapon, which allows her to slice through demons with ease. Without it, that would be impossible." I was about to ask something else, but the office door suddenly flew open and Ashley burst in, visibly agitated. "Emergency case, we need to head out immediately." She shot a quick look at me and added, "Rookie, this will be your initiation." I only nodded, though a thought flashed through my mind. I had just joined, and they were already sending me on a mission. There was no point in arguing, though. Maria stayed back at the office while the four of us headed out to the pickup truck parked at the entrance. Chad and I sat in the back, and as we drove, I couldn't help but ask, "Do you think it'll be dangerous?" Chad smirked. Well, the last rookie didn't make it. He got eaten by a giant centipede on his final mission. A chill ran down my spine at those words. I glanced at Ashley and Oscar sitting up front, but they only gave each other knowing smiles. I couldn't tell if Chad was serious or just trying to mess with me. After about half an hour, the truck stopped in front of a small house tucked away on the edge of the forest, far from the city. The house looked old and dilapidated, with peeling paint on the walls and a broken fence surrounding it. Dried bushes and solitary trees cast eerie shadows under the dim porch light, as if no one had lived there for years, though a faint glow from a window hinted otherwise. We got out of the truck and gathered by the tailgate where the equipment was stored. Oscar looked at me carefully and asked, "Do you know how to handle weapons?" I shook my head, feeling a bit out of place. He eyed me thoughtfully. Then, with a smirk, placed an old hat with a feather on my head, hung a necklace of garlic around my neck, and gave me a massive cross that looked more like a stage prop. To complete my gear, he handed me a large water gun filled with holy water. Standing there with this strange arsenal, I couldn't tell if they were joking or if they were dead serious. Meanwhile, Ashley and Oscar armed themselves with far more serious equipment. Oscar pulled out a heavy caliber pistol loaded with silver bullets, and Ashley took her katana, a weapon I knew was battle-tested. Chad equipped himself with a small crossbow fitted with wooden bolts that looked homemade but were probably something special. I stood there with my hat, garlic, and water gun, feeling like a total caricature, but I decided not to ask any more questions. Ashley gathered us in front of her and explained, "We received an emergency call from the government. Their team was here earlier but couldn't handle it, so it's up to us now. We don't know what we'll encounter inside, so stay sharp." I nodded, trying to mask my growing anxiety. We moved toward the house carefully, staying as silent as possible. The night was eerily quiet, amplifying the sense that something was terribly wrong. The house was steeped in darkness with only a faint glow from a window. The creaking porch seemed like it hadn't felt human footsteps in years. Everything around us looked haunting. The decrepit walls, dead shrubs, and shifting shadows under the porch light. When we reached the door, Oscar motioned for me to hang back a bit. Ashley, katana at the ready, gently pushed the door open, which, to my surprise, swung without a sound. Inside, the atmosphere was as dark and musty as it was outside. There was a damp, decaying smell that nearly made me step back. We entered, and each step echoed in the silence as if the house itself were listening to us. The floorboards creaked softly as we made our way down a narrow hallway lined with dust and cobwebs. Oscar checked the corners, his gun drawn, while Ashley led the way, moving with the cautious grace of a predator. I held my water gun in front of me, keeping close behind, but I was trembling inside from fear and from the ominous surroundings. The hallway led us to a living room filled with old, dusty furniture. A worn carpet lay on the floor and cracked photos of people with somber expressions lined the walls. It felt like someone was watching us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible lurked in the dark corners. Ashley motioned for us to stop, her eyes scanning the room, and I, straining my vision, tried to see something in the darkness as well. Suddenly I heard a faint rustling coming from the dresser in the corner of the room. My heart skipped a beat, but curiosity and a sense of duty overcame my fear, and I decided to investigate. Slowly, I approached the dresser, my hands shaking as I reached for the door. I caught a hint of movement inside and immediately aimed my water gun at it. I pulled the trigger, dousing the contents generously with holy water. To my surprise, out tumbled a figure, coughing and writhing as if struggling to breathe. Within a second, I realized it was just an ordinary man, a bald, 40-something with a large belly. He rolled out of the dresser, looking around in a panic, soaked from the water I'd drenched him with. Apparently, I had gone a bit overboard with the holy water. Without missing a beat, Ashley aimed her katana at him and sharply demanded, "Who are you?" The man, breathing heavily and glancing around, quickly answered, "My name's Bill. I live here." We exchanged glances, and I was taken aback. So, he was the resident of this house. We continued to question him, trying to understand what was going on and why he hadn't tried to leave this haunted place. Bill, a bit flustered, explained that he felt the presence of something, be it human or animal, he didn't know. This something kept him from leaving the house, as though he were under constant surveillance. "I see," Ashley muttered, exchanging a glance with Oscar. "Take him to the exit," she instructed Oscar, who nodded and gently but firmly led Bill out. Once they left, we remained in the dim room and resumed our search, bracing for the possibility that something far worse than a frightened tenant might spring upon us. We thoroughly inspected the living room, finding nothing unusual, so we decided to head toward the staircase leading to the second floor. The dim light filtering through the grimy windows barely illuminated our steps, and each creak of the stairs echoed in the silence as if the house itself were listening to our movements. I walked at the back, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling the tension build with every step. The stairs groaned under each of us, the walls covered in faded wallpaper with an air of age and dampness. In the dimness, the shadows seemed almost alive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching us from every nook and corner. When we reached the end of the hallway on the second floor, I suddenly sensed something unsettling, a menacing energy emanating from the last room, thick and dark like invisible black fumes slowly spreading through the space. I asked the others, "Do you feel that?" But they shook their heads. It was the same feeling I'd had when I encountered the girl. It was a nauseating, frightening sensation, as if the room itself was alive and waiting for us. We crept up to the door. Ashley, with her katana ready, gave a quick gesture and in one swift motion flung the door open. What we saw inside left me stunned. In the center of the room knelt a man, seemingly deep in meditation. Circling him was a creature that looked like a cross between a wolf and a dog. But its body was made of thick, smoky vapor, like a genie from ancient tales. Its fierce black eyes glowed, and it let out a low, rumbling growl as it orbited the man, as though either protecting or feeding off him with its dark energy. The creature radiated a sinister aura that sent a chill down to my very bones. The man remained kneeling, calm and unmoving, as if in a trance or meditation, seemingly connected to the shadowy beast in some unnatural way. Ashley glanced at Oscar and gave a signal. She would move in from the right, Oscar from the left, while I would cover them from behind. They began to circle the room cautiously, inching toward the man. I watched every step, clutching my water gun tightly, knowing it was likely useless against this kind of opponent. Suddenly, the demon noticed us. Its eyes flared, and with a guttural growl, it lunged. It went for Oscar first, who fired his gun, but the creature, like a living cloud, dodged and soared toward Ashley. She swung her katana, slashing through the smoky form of the demon. The creature howled, its cry both bestial and something beyond human, a sound that tore through the silence. The demon attacked them again and again, but Ashley and Oscar worked in perfect sync. Oscar shot to cut off its movements while Ashley skillfully sliced through its smoky body with her blade. With each strike, the demon grew weaker, its form seeming to break apart. Finally, after one last blow from Ashley, the creature flew back, retreating to the man on his knees. I watched in horror as the demon, a swirling mass of dark smoke, merged with the man, as though it were being absorbed into him. The man shuddered, his face losing its calm as his body began to convulse. And then, the unimaginable began. The man let out a low, feral growl that no human should be able to produce. His body began to transform, muscles expanding, ripping through his clothes, revealing a growing layer of coarse fur. His arms lengthened, fingers stretching into powerful claws. His face contorted, elongating into a snout with sharp fangs. His eyes turned blood red, and his nose extended, morphing into a predator's snout. Before us stood an actual werewolf. Ashley glanced back at us, swearing fiercely, and said to Oscar, "Plan B." "What's Plan B?" I asked, gripped by fear, but seeing them bolt toward the door, the answer became obvious. As Ashley ran past me, she yelled, "Plan B! Run and don't look back!" Damn, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I knew I had no choice. I took off after them, feeling adrenaline surge through me. The creature, now fully transformed into a terrifying werewolf, lumbered behind me, its heavy footsteps and growl echoing down the hallway. When I reached the stairs and looked back, I saw the beast crash into the hallway, slamming against the wall, its red eyes locking onto me. It let out a menacing snarl and charged. "Hell, I need to run!" Flashed through my mind, and I heard Ashley's shout ahead, "Run, you idiot!" I raced down the stairs, skipping several steps at a time. Just as I reached the last step, the werewolf lunged, and its massive paw swiped me to the side. I slammed against the wall, feeling a sharp pain in my side as if a rib had cracked. Trying to get up, I noticed a gun lying nearby. Meanwhile, the creature was closing in, its eyes blazing with fury. Suddenly, shots rang out. Oscar was firing, trying to draw the werewolf's attention away from me. One of the bullets struck the beast in the side, and I saw a faint smoke rise from the wound. The werewolf howled in pain, the wound slowly smoldering like a burn. "You'll kill him! Stop!" Ashley shouted, standing a bit farther away, brandishing her katana. The werewolf paused for a second, then resumed its growling. I summoned my strength, grabbed the water gun, and aimed it straight into the beast's open maw, unleashing a full stream of holy water. The werewolf roared and jumped back, giving me precious time to get to my feet and dash toward the exit where Chad was setting up a trap. As we burst into the yard, the beast charged after us, relentless. Chad was working quickly, his hands moving like lightning as he set something up on the ground, knowing every second counted. Ashley yelled, "Hurry up! Almost done!" Chad grumbled, fastening the last components. As we ran past, the werewolf leaped straight at Chad, but its body froze mid-air as if it had hit an invisible wall. It began thrashing wildly, but couldn't move, as if held by invisible chains. At a safe distance, I turned and saw the trap activated. It was a square device resembling a platform from which brilliant azure beams shot into the air, forming an energy cage. The beams shot up from each corner, creating a glowing frame that held the werewolf in place. These beams wrapped around it, trapping it in an invisible web, rendering it helpless no matter how hard it struggled. The creature roared and thrashed, but the beams held it tight, like a fly caught in a spider's web. Chad, standing beside the trap, exhaled in relief and looked at us with a proud smile. "What is that thing?" I asked, still stunned by how the trap had immobilized the werewolf. "The professor invented this trap," Chad explained, carefully removing small panels and sealing the device like a giant box. The creature inside continued to snarl and struggle, but it was completely immobilized. After a few minutes, Ashley made a call, summoning someone to the scene. Soon, a group of uniformed professionals arrived, their expressions serious and focused. They exchanged a few words with Ashley before beginning the work of transporting the creature. As we piled back into the truck to return, I couldn't help but ask, "Who are they?" Ashley looked back at me and explained, "They're a special government unit tasked with handling creatures like this. Our job is to catch them, and from there they take over." "Got it," I nodded, amazed at how deeply the government kept things like this under wraps. It made me wonder just how many more secrets were hidden and what else was being kept from ordinary people. We returned to the office, exhausted but satisfied with a job well done. As we walked in, Oscar, with a slight smile, placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "I didn't think you'd handle your first mission so well." Professor Laurie was already in the room, seated at the desk, and looked us over with his piercing gaze, studying each of us. After a brief pause, he praised us. "Good work, everyone." I felt a wave of relief and pride, thinking we might even celebrate my first mission. But, true to form, the professor was all business. "Sure, we could celebrate the rookie's first assignment, but the work won't wait," he added, tossing a folder marked Top Secret onto the desk.